So, when you build a bridge, there is this underlying expectation of just absolute precision.
Right, like zero room for error.
Exactly. I mean, you look at the engineering, the steel is stress tested, the load-bearing math is double-checked by a computer. If a massive steel beam is cracked or, a crucial structural bolt is missing, you can visually see it.
Yeah, it's very tangible.
Right. It is entirely binary. The bridge is safe or the bridge is unsafe. Welcome to today's deep dive, by the way. We are so glad you're here with us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Because, well, things in the real world aren't usually as measurable as a bridge, which is a very comforting way to view the world, honestly. We inherently like things to be visible and, neatly categorized.
We really do. But if a bridge missing a bolt falls, the consequences are obvious. But when you step into the world of, say, a high-stakes nursing exam like the TEAS or the HESI, or honestly just scrolling through your daily news feed,
Oh, yeah, it's a completely different story.
it really is. Those cracked structural beams are completely hidden. They're buried behind incredibly confident voices, emotional delivery, and just really dense scientific jargon. So today, we're analyzing what I think is the ultimate intellectual superpower, which is how to evaluate an argument.
Definitely a superpower.
Right. And we are pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources today. We've got clinical entrance exam study guides, some philosophy texts dating literally back to ancient Greece,
Yeah.
and real-world case studies of, well, massive scientific disasters.
And our mission with these sources really is to uncover exactly how to judge whether the evidence someone offers actually supports the massive claim they are making.
Which is so much harder than it sounds.
It is, because evaluating an argument isn't about deciding if you personally agree with the conclusion. I mean, that's what we usually do, right? But it is entirely about testing the structural integrity of how that conclusion was built.
I really want to unpack that structural integrity piece, because my instinct is always to just react to the conclusion. If I read a headline that says, coffee makes you live forever, I just think, great, I love coffee.
Right, we all do that.
Yeah, but our sources say we have to slow down and look at the moving parts. So how is a formal argument actually built?
Well, every argument at its core relies on three essential components. First, you have the claim.
Okay.
This is also called the conclusion. It is the destination, right? The actual point being argued for, the thing the author wants you to believe.
Right, the main takeaway.
Exactly. Second, you have the premises. These are the specific reasons, the data points, or, the evidence being offered to support that claim.
The proof, basically.
The proof. And finally, you have the inference.
Wait, the inference?
Yeah, this is the invisible logical link that actually connects the premises to the claim.
Okay, let's unpack this because, abstract logic can get heavy fast. I love visualizing this. Think of an argument like a table.
Oh, I like that.
So the claim, the thing they want you to believe, is the tabletop. The premises, the evidence they provide, those are the wooden legs holding it up.
Right.
And that third part, the inference, those are the screws physically holding the legs to the tabletop.
That is a great analogy.
Because if those wooden legs are weak and rotting, or the screws are completely stripped, it literally doesn't matter how beautiful the tabletop is.
The whole thing just crashes to the ground.
Exactly.
And that visual perfectly highlights the single most common error test takers make on these clinical exams, like the TEAS.
Which is what?
They confuse the tabletop with the legs, meaning they confuse the claim with the evidence.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I could see that.
Right. When you are reading a dense paragraph about, say, a new cardiac medication, you have to mentally isolate what is being argued from what is being offered as support.
Because they kind of blend together when you're rushing.
Exactly. If you read a compelling statistic in the text, your brain might just latch onto it, think, oh, that's the main point. But a statistic is almost always just a leg holding up the table.
It's the premise, not the claim.
Spot on.
Which means before you can even judge if an argument is good or bad, you have to separate the parts. But assuming we've identified the claim and the premises, assuming we know how the table is built, our sources bring up this incredibly tricky concept called validity.
Oh, validity. Yes.
And looking through this, you start to realize that a perfectly constructed table can still be made of absolutely rotten wood.
This is where formal logic gets extremely counterintuitive. We really have to separate two concepts here: a valid argument and a sound argument.
Okay, break that down for me.
So deductive validity purely means that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true based on the structure alone.
Just the structure.
Just the structure. It's a test of architecture, nothing else. Aristotle's gold standard is the famous syllogism. You know it. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. The structure is flawless. If premise 1 and premise 2 are true, the conclusion is locked in.
Right.
And it's also a sound argument because, in reality, men are actually mortal and Socrates was a man. But the sources highlight this exam favorite trick using penguins.
Yes, the penguin trap. So consider the structure. All birds can fly, penguins are birds, therefore penguins can fly.
Wait, hold on. Here's where it gets really interesting. I'm looking at this penguin example and my brain is fighting me. Are you telling me that an argument can get an A+ in logical validity while being totally objectively false in the real world?
That is exactly what this demonstrates, and it is such a crucial trap to avoid, especially on these exams.
It just feels wrong.
It does, but the structure of the penguin argument is geometrically flawless. If it were actually true that all birds could fly, and we know penguins are birds, then the inference holds perfectly. Penguins must fly. It passes the test of logical correctness,
Which is
validity, but it fails the test of factual correctness, which is truth.
because ostriches and penguins exist.
Exactly. The very first premise, all birds can fly, is factually false in the real world.
So the argument is valid, but we call it unsound.
Yes, an argument is only sound when it is structurally valid and the premises are actually true.
That right there is going to save someone's grade on a test. Logical correctness and factual correctness are two entirely separate tests.
100%.
But, I mean, this brings up a huge practical problem for me. That Socrates example is so neat and tidy. But if I'm a nurse in a busy emergency room, I'm not dealing with absolute mathematical truths.
Yeah, no.
I'm dealing with messy human biology. So how did we get from ancient Greek math classrooms to modern clinical evidence?
Well, it took a surprisingly long time to bridge that gap. For centuries, ancient and medieval logicians just followed Aristotle's lead. They focused almost entirely on formal, deductive validity.
Just the math of it.
Right. But then in the 20th century, a British philosopher named Stephen Toulmin realized this math-based logic was totally failing us in the real world.
Because the real world isn't neat.
Exactly. In his 1958 book, The Uses of Argument, Toulmin pointed out that doctors, lawyers, and journalists, they don't use perfect Aristotelian syllogisms. They use what he called field-dependent evidence.
Okay, meaning the standard of evidence changes based on the context of the field you're operating in.
Yes, exactly.
Like, a lawyer's evidence for a motive is structurally completely different from a doctor's evidence for a bacterial infection.
Precisely. And Toulmin sparked this massive shift toward informal logic. The academic world finally realized we needed a way to evaluate messy, real-world claims.
Thank goodness.
Right. And this evolved significantly when the American Philosophical Association released the Delphi Report in 1990, which was led by Peter Facione.
What did that report do?
They essentially formally declared that evaluating evidence isn't just some vague philosophical virtue. It is a critical, measurable skill that can and should be tested.
So for you listening, if you are prepping for the TEAS or HESI, you might be looking at this philosophical history and wondering why this very specific skill is taking up so much space on a modern nursing entrance exam.
Yeah, to understand why it's on the exam, you have to look at one of the darkest moments in modern medical history.
The 1999 report, right?
Yes. In 1999, the Institute of Medicine published a landmark report called To Err is Human. It exposed terrifying levels of preventable errors in U.S. hospitals.
It's so sad.
We were seeing massive numbers of patient injuries and deaths simply because of flawed reasoning.
Let's tie that to one of the biggest misconceptions our sources debunk, which is the appeal to authority. I imagine in the 1990s, the culture of a hospital was very hierarchical.
Very much so.
A senior doctor says, administer this drug this way, and the nurses just do it because the expert said so.
And that was a massive part of the problem. Just because an expert says something doesn't automatically make the premise sound.
Right.
The To Err is Human report forced the entire nursing profession to pivot hard toward evidence-based practice, or EBP.
It changed everything.
It did. The culture shifted from, we do this because the senior attending said so, to, we do this because the peer-reviewed clinical research proves it works.
So evaluating an argument on a multiple-choice reading test today is literally the exact precursor skill to questioning a medication dosage protocol based on a new study at a patient's bedside tomorrow.
That is exactly why it's tested.
But so how do we actually test that messy evidence in practice? Because if clinical arguments are messy, they aren't deductive, like the Socrates example, they are inductive.
Right, they're inductive.
And inductive arguments mean the premises only make the conclusion probable, not absolutely certain.
Right. Think about the historical belief that all crows are black. For hundreds of years, every single crow observed by European scientists was black.
So the inductive argument was incredibly strong based on the data they had.
Exactly. But then rare white leucistic crows were documented. The argument wasn't necessarily built wrong based on the initial observations, but inductive reasoning is always provisional. It is a matter of degree.
Since it's a matter of degree, our sources lay out a specific toolkit to test that probability.
Yes, they do.
If we can't have mathematical certainty, we need axes of measurement. The sources say we have to judge evidence on 4 criteria: relevance, sufficiency, credibility, and bias.
The big 4.
The big 4. And when I was reading through the sources, the Wakefield vaccine study from 1998 just stopped me in my tracks. Because on the surface, it looked like a perfectly built table. But when you apply these 4 axes, it completely collapses.
Yeah, the Andrew Wakefield study is arguably one of the most destructive medical arguments of the modern era.
Yeah.
He published a paper in The Lancet, which is, a highly prestigious medical journal.
Very prestigious.
And he claimed a link between the MMR vaccine and autism. If you just glance at this, it has scientific jargon, it's published, it sounds totally authoritative.
But let's test the axis of sufficiency, because his massive global claim that vaccines cause autism was based on a sample size of just 12 children.
Wow!
12 kids. The tabletop he was building was the size of a football field, and he was resting the entire thing on a single wooden toothpick.
Which is a great place to smash another misconception our sources highlight. The idea that more data, or just having a published paper, equals strong evidence.
Quantity does not equal quality.
Exactly. You could have a mountain of data, but if it fails the sufficiency test for the specific claim you're making, it's useless. But Wakefield's argument didn't just fail on sufficiency, it catastrophically failed on credibility and bias.
This is the part that is just wild.
Yeah, our sources report that later investigations revealed the data for those 12 children had been actively manipulated to fit his conclusion.
And the bias part.
Yeah.
He had an undisclosed financial conflict of interest. He was secretly being funded by lawyers who were actively trying to sue vaccine manufacturers.
Right. The paper was eventually fully retracted, and he lost his medical license, but the damage to public health persists.
It really does.
It just shows that an expert's testimony is only strong if they actually represent a broader consensus, have genuine expertise, and crucially, lack bias. One rogue doctor with a hidden financial motive does not outweigh a global consensus of rigorously vetted, peer-reviewed data.
Right. So let's look at another real-world case study that's a bit more pop culture, because it highlights a totally different trap. The power posing study from 2010.
Oh, yeah.
I vividly remember the TED Talk for this. It went insanely viral.
It really did. And the claim was incredibly appealing. It argued that holding an expansive power pose for just 2 minutes chemically changed your hormone levels, increasing testosterone and decreasing cortisol, which naturally boosted your confidence.
But again, if we apply our toolkit, the structural integrity of that claim comes under serious pressure. Let's look at the sufficiency axis again, combined with another major misconception from our sources.
Yes.
Confusing correlation with causation.
Yes. So the original 2010 study was based on a very small sample size of just 42 people.
Only 42.
Right. And when researchers tried to replicate the experiment in 2015 using a much larger, rigorously designed study to account for human variability, those hormonal effects simply did not reappear.
They just weren't there.
The initial researchers basically observed 2 things happening: people posing and people reporting feeling powerful, and claimed one caused the other.
But just because 2 things happen at the same time or in sequence does not mean one caused the other. That is just a correlation.
Exactly.
To prove causation, you need massive controlled studies that rule out coincidences and hidden variables. Maybe the 42 people in the first study felt powerful because of the environment they were in, or the way the researchers spoke to them, not the physical pose itself.
And the power posing phenomenon really demonstrates how a compelling narrative can bypass our logical filters. The TED Talk was delivered with immense passion and certainty.
It was so persuasive.
And this is a vital lesson for evaluating evidence. Confidence is not evidence. Passionate, emotional delivery is what Aristotle called pathos. It is a tool of persuasion. It makes you feel something.
But it doesn't prove anything.
Right. A calmly delivered, well-cited claim with sufficient unbiased data is infinitely stronger than someone speaking confidently on a stage.
So this shows us that just because something goes incredibly viral online doesn't mean the size and design of the study actually supports the massive claim being built on top of it.
No, it doesn't.
Which brings us to the really high stakes of flawed reasoning. Because failing to properly evaluate these four axes, relevance, sufficiency, credibility, and bias, isn't just a mistake you make on a multiple-choice test. It has disastrous historical consequences.
Yeah, we have to look at the 1927 Supreme Court case, Book v. Bell, which our sources highlight. In this ruling, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. upheld a state law that permitted the forced sterilization of individuals deemed feeble-minded.
It is a chilling piece of history.
Truly, his written justification famously included the line, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough."
And when you look at the argument the Supreme Court relied upon, the sources note that it rested entirely on the eugenics movement. They took a movement that lacked rigorous scientific sufficiency and was entirely driven by profound bias, and they accepted it as a credible, quote-unquote, expert source.
It perfectly illustrates the danger of the appeal to authority fallacy at the highest level of government. The court accepted the premises because they were dressed up in scientific authority, without ever subjecting that evidence to the rigorous evaluation of relevance, sufficiency, credibility, and bias.
They didn't test the legs of the table.
They didn't. And when you don't test the wooden legs holding up the table, deeply flawed ideologies can be codified into law.
So the eugenics movement is a horrific historical example of bad reasoning doing real harm. But today, we are facing a completely different beast when it comes to arguments and evidence. We are dealing with algorithms.
No, algorithms fundamentally change how arguments reach us. Social media platforms don't just passively host information, their algorithms actively amplify it.
Right.
But they are not optimizing for logical evidence, what Aristotle called logos. They are optimizing for engagement. They selectively reward emotional charge pathos.
Which ties perfectly into another massive misconception our sources point out, which is the idea that a strong argument is one that I agree with. My fear is that algorithms are systematically eroding our ability to separate our personal feelings from actual evidence quality.
I think they are, because strength is purely a property of the evidence and the logic. It is entirely independent of your personal feelings.
Okay, say more about that.
Well, you can find an argument you completely disagree with to be logically strong, and you can find an argument you passionately agree with to be logically weak.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But because algorithms constantly bombard us with emotionally optimized content that confirms our existing beliefs, our brains shortcut to accepting the claim without ever checking the premises.
So because the algorithm makes us feel good or makes us righteously angry, we just accept the tabletop and never bother to look under it to see if the wooden legs are rotting.
Exactly. Which is why the critical thinking skills championed by the Delphi Report in the 90s are arguably more urgent right now than at any point in human history.
Because we have to fight the tech.
You have to actively build the habit of manually overriding the algorithm's emotional hack. When you feel that surge of agreement or outrage, you have to pause and ask, wait, where is the actual evidence? Is it relevant? Is it sufficient? Is it credible? Is it biased?
Okay, this has been an incredibly dense and frankly fascinating journey. Let's recap what we've unpacked today. We started by breaking down the anatomy of an argument into the claim, the premises, and the inference.
Right, visualizing the tabletop, the wooden legs, and the screws holding it all together.
We also uncovered the trap of validity, realizing that an argument structure can be 100% logically flawless while the premises remain factually false, leaving the argument completely unsound.
Yes, the penguin trap.
The penguin trap. And then we tracked the evolution of logic, escaping the rigid math classrooms of ancient Greece, thanks to Stephen Toulmin, and saw how the devastating 1999 to err is human report forced modern nursing into evidence-based practice.
And most importantly, we learned that because real-world clinical evidence is inductive and messy, we have to test it using those four axes: relevance, sufficiency, credibility, and bias.
Smashing the traps of viral TED Talks and manipulated studies along the way.
The toolkit is there. It just requires the discipline to use it, especially when a claim sounds exceptionally confident.
And that brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with, something that wasn't in our historical sources, but is honestly staring us in the face right now. We talked about how social media algorithms hack our emotions to bypass our logic.
Right.
But what happens as artificial intelligence becomes our primary tool for reading and summarizing information? If we start relying on AI to summarize our news, to synthesize clinical studies, or to tell us if an argument is valid, do we lose this critical thinking muscle entirely?
That is a terrifying thought.
Right. If the AI evaluates the wooden legs for us, will we eventually forget how to spot a rotting table ourselves? Next time you let a piece of technology summarize a complex issue for you, just pause and ask yourself if you're outsourcing your ultimate intellectual superpower. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep checking those premises, and we will catch you next time.